What exactly is your own personal criteria for an all-time great? I don't think there's an answer out there that gets unanimous approval, but through this series, I want to help in outlining the argument for 7 different fighters as MMA's undisputed GOAT. Anderson Silva, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Amanda Nunes, George St-Pierre, Fedor Emelianenko, Demetrious Johnson, and John Jones. I won't try to deny it. These 7 fighters are not all on the same level, but each certainly has something that has established them as a cut above all others, within their respective divisions and eras. Everything else is a matter of preference. Week by week, I'll take one of these fighters, breaking down their unique claim to the throne, dropping some insight on where that claim might be hindered, before leaving the actual decision making up to you guys. I think it'll be an interesting and enjoyable dip into one of the sport's most ever-present topics. And between myself and you guys, our loyal viewers, we're gonna try and get as close as possible to finding MMA's GOAT. A lot of us as fans, especially in our earliest days of watching the sport, we found ourselves hugely invested in those moments that bridged the gap between real-life martial arts and the wild, magical ridiculousness of the movies we grew up watching. There is a sobering moment that happens when one actually watches genuine martial arts competition for the first time, where yes, it does look pretty damn cool and technical, but in many ways, as a novice, you do have to realign your expectations and accept that for the most part, MMA can also be pretty ugly, pretty unrefined, and covered with imperfections. And I mean that with the highest level of respect intended. That's just the nature of real fighting. But one look at the best moments of the longtime middleweight champion Anderson Silva will be enough to tell you that he was in fact capable of being that Bruce Lee-esque fantasy fighter of our dreams. He's the mixed martial artist you show friends who are watching MMA for the first time, or at least that was historically true. The type of fighter who, in his prime, had a certain magic coursing through his veins. If you want to talk about why Anderson Silva should be considered the GOAT, it's because he, perhaps more than any fighter in the history of the sport, brought out that childish glee in us. Made us at times forget that we weren't in fact watching a movie. And I suppose for the purposes of this video, what makes his claim so strong is that he did all of this while still being one of the most dominant champions in UFC history. All of those successful title defenses at 185 pounds, as well as his frequent dips into the 205 pound roster. That 16-fight win streak, the longest in UFC history, that allowed this champion the time at the top necessary to build an aura, to build an expectation among the fans that he would not be removed from his throne. And that just made all of those thrilling finishes, those close calls, those what the hell is he doing moments, it just made them all so much more exciting at the time, because with each passing victory, the stakes truly became greater for Anderson. His 16-fight win streak came with just one non-title bout as his debut, his 49-second demolition of Chris Lieben. From there onwards, as the middleweight champion, Silva fought 15 times, fighting on a hot streak, with his reputation and place within the pantheon of all-time greats growing stronger with each victory. And look, there were certainly a few duds, in terms of entertainment value. That Damian Maia fight, for example, did the man no favors. But what I will say is that there were no controversial decisions in the title reign of Anderson Silva. Chael Sonnen pushed him as far as he could, but that finish was conclusive, and where his activity rates dropped, he was coasting more than anything else. So it does depend on how heavily you are willing to criticize the Spider for simply winning 2 or 3 of his fights in a less than electric style. Because those bouts aside, Anderson's reign was complete and total carnage. Even when you put the artistry of what Silva did in there to one side, the numbers that he managed to put together in his prime already give his claim to GOAT status some legs. Couple that with his air of dominance, the levels of striking that he reached, his iconic highlight reel, and all of a sudden that's a compelling set of pros. But what exactly are the cons? Well, obviously his shocking loss to Chris Weidman brought his run of excellence to an almighty close. A fight that has been revised in our mind to almost boil it down to Silva's play acting, rather than Weidman just being the better equipped of the two. Because at that point in Silva's career, though his natural instinct for the finish and incredible desire to win pulled him over a few tough challenges, you need not look any further than the first Chael Sonnen matchup for proof that there was indeed a blueprint on how to defeat Anderson, or at least that the gap between him and the contenders was narrowing. And though Sonnen failed twice, Weidman in retrospect was exactly the type of fighter who was inevitably going to inherit the division from the champion. And for that opening round or so of action against Silva, he was proving himself to be a good stylistic challenge. The taunting that led to the finish was indeed the definitive moment. And who knows, maybe Anderson would have won if he didn't. But to disregard Weidman's great work in that opening round would be foolish. And I think that even though Silva lost under such unfortunate circumstances, there is almost a sense that it was the perfect end to Anderson's reign from a narrative perspective. Live by the sword, die by the sword. And I suppose when it comes to the downfall of Anderson Silva, one of his greatest strengths comes from the fact that he never ever showed up in that octagon trying to be something he's not. In the 8 fights that followed that first Weidman loss, though Silva only officially recorded 1 victory, there is still quite a bit to unpack. That Weidman rematch was obviously incredibly unfortunate, due to Anderson's leg. The same can also be said for the Jared Cannonier defeat. In his original comeback bout against Nick Diaz, he looked a lot more flat than usual, but there is a real case to make that he defeated Michael Bisping in his subsequent return after that matchup. I actually scored the Derek Brunson fight against Anderson, but again, he was looking like he was having fun in there, something that was also true of the Adesanya matchup, and his retirement fight against Uriah Hall, until things started going against him. And obviously, his run-in with USADA and subsequent suspension from competition after his matchup against Diaz is something that will be quite off-putting for a lot of you. And it does deserve to be mentioned because I understand that a lot of people do factor that into their ultimate pick for the GOAT. But yeah, I don't know, Anderson Silva's decline was as uniquely odd as his best years. And in comparison to some of the uglier drop-offs we've seen, I do think that there's more to this period than the 7 losses would suggest. On a side note, when you also consider that he outboxed and defeated the former WBC middleweight champion boxer Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. at the grand old age of 46, no matter how washed up Chavez was, it still puts the strength of Anderson's place within the world of combat sports into perspective. Again, your own personal criteria will dictate how you view this. Do you judge a fighter by the highs they reached, assessing their GOAT claim based on the longevity of their peak? Or do you consider their career as a whole, their ups, their downs, their early years and their later years when they're clearly past their prime? If you want to talk about why Anderson Silva is the GOAT, you can bring up his incredible knockout ratio, that all-time great win streak, a record that still stands to this day, the fact that he was so willing to test himself 20 pounds above at light heavyweight. You can discuss his best victories, the many scalps of legends that he had accumulated over the years, those ridiculous finishes that make him the owner of perhaps the single greatest highlight reel in UFC history. And all of those things are true. All of those things offer weight to this argument. But Anderson Silva, above all other fighters, was the guy who bridged the gap between the grounded world of mixed martial arts and something that was at times truly magical. No fighter in MMA history at this level has projected such an air of enjoyment in there as Anderson has. Whether we're talking about prime Silva or the aging former champion in his mid to late 40s, whenever Anderson Silva is inside that octagon, he's having fun in there in a way that just shouldn't be so successful. And I think the fact that he made it work for him for so long instantly places him into a category of his own among all other fighters. The playfulness of it all. I do think that it made his eventual defeat at the hands of Chris Weidman all that more poetic. Obviously, it was bad to see a legend go out like that, but in reality, it almost made more sense for Silva's fall to come under such circumstances. He indeed flew closer to the sun than 99.99% of fighters would ever dare. And though he eventually got burned, he didn't allow that shock to change him in any way, and I think that's very commendable. The man is a true martial artist, an innovator, one who dragged MMA's relatively green striking standards into its modern era. In terms of his competitive success, Silva in many ways is MMA's answer to Muhammad Ali, the iconic showman who combined a unique fighting style and the audacity to pull it off, with an unquestionably great resume at the top of the sport. To this day, he remains a great striker, even in his mid-40s. A man who is just clearly enthralled by the martial arts journey and the lifestyle that comes with it. Anderson Silva, to put it plainly, had just about as much fun in there as we did watching him. And when you consider just how exhilarating his best moments were, his case for GOAT status is a very, very strong one. But what do you make of the Spider as a candidate for GOAT honors? And where do you place him in your own list? Do let us know in the comments section below. Let's really try to get a discussion going. This series will be running over the course of the next 2 months or so, a period of time that will hopefully give you a good set of cases with which to make your own judgment. So if you enjoyed this opening episode, please do show your support by leaving a comment, a like, and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We gotta keep those YouTube algorithms on our side, folks. Thanks for watching.